angle bisectors. Okay, so we're going to take a look at some triangles and what perpendicular and angle bisectors are going to do to triangles. So the first thing is that a point is equidistant from two figures when the point is the same distance from each figure. So a point is equidistant from two figures when the point is the same distance from each figure. So here, A to C is the same distance from C to B. So these lines here are the same distance. Okay, so those are the same distance. And if you notice as well here, and it's already marked, but AP is the same thing as BP. So these parts of the triangle, we've got two sets of lines that are congruent to each other. And it says that CP is a perpendicular bisector of AB. So notice this symbol here, it's small, but this right here, it looks like an upside down T. That symbol means perpendicular. So when you see that symbol, I'm going to write up here, this symbol right here, it just means perpendicular. Okay? And perpendicular means it forms a 90-degree angle. Okay? So if a perpendicular bisector, if CP is the perpendicular bisector of AB, then CA equals CB. Okay? So these two lines here are congruent. They're the same. So the converse means, like, if you just kind of flip your sentence around, that's what converse means. If DA is equal to DB, then point D lies on the perpendicular bisector of AB. So that just means that if you extend this line, if you keep going with that line, okay, you just keep going with it, then it is on the perpendicular bisector. We know, we can conclude that it is perpendicular. So these lines are congruent, and these lines are congruent, okay? So find each measure using what we know about perpendicular bisectors. So since we do know, basically there's like 3 facts of information. So if you know 2 out of the 3 facts, you can conclude the third thing. So since we know it's perpendicular and we know these are congruent, we can conclude these lines are congruent. So since SP is 6.8, RS, which is what we're looking for, RS is 6.8. Okay? So on B, since we know, since it's given to us that this is 90 degrees, and since we know that these are congruent, both of these are 24, and we know that FG is 9.5. We know EF is 9.5, is asking for EG. So 9.5 plus 9.5 is going to be 19. Okay, so EG is all the way across, so be careful with that. Okay, so on C, we know that it's perpendicular, and we know that these are marked as being congruent. So since those are congruent, we know that these are congruent. We can conclude that those are congruent. So we got to solve for x first. So we would do 5x equals 3x plus 14. So we'll solve for x. So we'll subtract 3x, and we'll get 2x equals 14. Divide by 2. So x equals 7. So it wants us to find AD. So AD is this part right here. So we do 5 times 7, which is 35. Okay? So on D, it first wants us to find x, then find AD. Okay? So since we know this is perpendicular, and it tells us these are congruent, okay? Well, we do 9x minus 2 equals 7x plus 10. So I'm going to solve for x. I'm going to subtract 7x, and that's going to give me 2x. And I'm going to go ahead and add 2 over here to give me 12. I'll divide by 2. So x is going to equal 6. So there's my x. Now it wants me to find AD. AD is all the way across. So if I plug it into one side, so I'm going to plug it in right here. So 7 times 6 plus 10. So 7 times 6 is 42. 42 plus 10 is 52. So this side is 52, which means this side is also 52. So 52 plus 52 is going to be 104. So AD would be 104 because AD is all the way across. Okay, so on E, we've got the 90-degree angle. We're told that these are congruent. If those are congruent, that means these have to be congruent. So we know that. So I can do 2x plus 11 equals 4x minus 5. I'm going to subtract 2x, which gives me 2x, and then I'm going to add 5, which gives me 16. I'll divide by 2. So 8 is x. It wanted me to find x, and then it wants me to find WZ. So WZ is right here. So 2 times 8 plus 11. 2 times 8 is 16. 16 plus 11 is 27. So 27 is WZ. Okay? Okay. So then we get to angle bisectors. So it says if AD bisects angle BAC. So if it bisects it, what that means is that these two angles here are going to be congruent. And DB is perpendicular to AB. So perpendicular. And DC is perpendicular to AC. Then DB equals DC. So we know that these two lines are congruent. So three things are happening. We've got congruent angles, we've got perpendicular, we got two parts that are perpendicular, and we've got lines that are perpendicular. We also have the converse. So if we know that we've got DB is perpendicular to AB and DC is perpendicular to AC, and if we know that these are congruent, so if we start off by knowing these things, then we can conclude that the angles are congruent. Okay, so very, very similar to perpendicular bisectors, but now we know that the angles are being cut in half. So for this one, since we know that these are perpendicular, and since we know that these are both 7, meaning those are congruent, we know that these angles, we can conclude that these angles are congruent. So therefore, since this angle here is 42 degrees, we know this angle is 42 degrees. And it wants to know angle GFJ. GFJ. So that would be 42 degrees. Okay. So since we know on this one that this is 90 degrees, it tells us it's 90 degrees. And since we know that these little markings here means that those angles are congruent. So when you see those little rounded curves there and angles, it means that each angle that has a rounded curve, it means that they are congruent. We can conclude that these lines here are congruent. So I can take 5x and set it equal to 6x minus 5. Now I'm going to solve for x. I'm going to subtract 6x from each side. I'll get negative x equals negative 5. So if I divide by negative 1, I'll get x equals, dividing by negative 1. So x equals 5. Okay, so x equals 5. So then it wants to know RS. So RS is right here, so I'm going to plug 5 in. So 6 times 5 minus 5. So 30 minus 5 is going to be 25. Okay. So in example 3, find each indicated measure using the figure below. So it's telling us that BD bisects angle ABC. So if it bisects it, we know that these two angles are congruent and that DC is 6.9. So it's telling us that that is 6.9. Find DA. Well, if it bisects it, we're told it's already given that these are perpendicular. So that means that these two parts are congruent. So AD or DA is also going to be 6.9. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go back and erase this because I got to get it ready for my next problem. Okay. So in part B, it tells us that BD bisects ABC, or ADC, sorry. So I know that. Well, that already tells me that I know that these two parts are going to be congruent. AD is going to be 3Z plus 7. And CD is 2Z plus 11. Okay, so, and it wants us to find CD. Well, I got to figure out Z first, so I'm going to do 3Z plus 7 equals 2Z plus 11. I got to figure out Z. So I'm going to subtract 2Z, which is going to give me Z. And I'm going to subtract 7, which is going to give me 4. So if it wants us to find CD, I'm going to plug 4 in to the CD part. So that gives me 8 plus 11, which is going to give me 19. Okay? All right, so let's go back and get rid of this and get ready for our next problem. All right, so it says find the measure. Let's see here. All right, find the measure of angle ABC when AD is 3.2 and CD is 3.2. Okay, so that tells us that these are congruent. So since those are congruent and we have these are 90-degree angles, that means that we can conclude that those two angles are congruent, that those two angles are the same. And the measure of DBC is 39 degrees. So this angle here is 39 degrees. Okay, so it wants to know the measure of angle ABC. So ABC is this big angle here. Okay, so if this is 39 degrees, we know this angle is 39 degrees. So what we would do is 39 degrees plus 39 degrees, and 39 degrees plus 39 degrees is going to be 78 degrees. So that big angle is going to be 78 degrees. Okay, and that is going to conclude this set of notes.